goodness, I'm so excited for you to meet both Nicole Kirby and Bob Noyed from CESO Communications. Together, they have like a lot of years of experience in school communication. And today we're talking about something important. We're talking about taking complex issues and how to communicate. And Bob specifically states, there's 4 different aspects to communicating about a critical issue or a complex issue. We're going to talk about referendum and bonds, but we're also going to talk about other things. I think you're going to take a lot of notes on this. We're also going to dive into the types and the ways that we communicate and how we think about the audience, and also some great advice just on, hey, what's the strategy, what's the goal, and really thinking through those things before we just add another social media platform or decide to do something and invest in some new strategy that we really think about it. So we've got some great resources in the show notes today as well. If you're listening to this podcast for the first time, where have you been? Like, we've been doing this podcast since 2020. But I hope that you hit subscribe because we do a new episode every single Monday. And you can go back and you can binge listen to this Wisconsin accent. I talk to the best of the best in school PR all across the country, some even internationally. This is going to give you some great tips and tricks to do your job better. You never know when that one tip is going to like transform your life and make it so much easier. And I know that we have a difficult job when we're in school communication. So we all need those tips. So hit that subscribe button, maybe even share this episode with somebody else. But before we get to the interview, let's get to this week's K-12 PR tip. All right, this week's K-12 PR tip. You got an assignment, okay? I want you to go to your website and then go to your business office or finance department's page on your website. What do you see? Do you just see a budget? Do you just see a bunch of numbers? Take what you learned today, and this is specifically, Bob shared this advice right after we hit stop after the recording, but he said, bring that to life with stories. Put those numbers in perspective. We have, in some cases, a lot of responsibilities, and certainly accountants and business officials have to run the budget. The superintendent runs the school, but we have to put things into terms that people can understand, and we do that through stories. Sometimes it's even letting people know how many lunches you serve a year or how many miles your buses drive in a year to get your students to school, how many floors or bathrooms are cleaned on a daily basis in your schools. There's just so much to communicate. And so that is my tip for this week, straight from Bob, is take a look at your website and bring those numbers to life. And I think that it's going to make your job easier when people understand exactly what you do, because budgets are big for schools and a lot of people can't really relate to those. But if we can break it down into things they do understand, it will make communication and your job much easier. Now let's jump in and you guys can meet my friends, Nicole and Bob. Oh my goodness. I am so excited today. We have a real treat. 2 for 1. We have Nicole Kirby, APR, and Bob Noyed, APR. Bob, did I pronounce your last name right?
Close enough.
What do you say?
1 syllable, Noyed.
Noyed. Okay, I'm sorry. We're screwing up already, and that's okay. But both of these wonderful, awesome people are I met through NSPRA, and they both work at CESO Communications. So hopefully many of you that are listening already know either one or both of them. But I would love for you to each kind of share your background and some of your current work that you're doing now at CESO. Bob, do you want to start first?
Sure. I've been at CESO since July of 2019. Before then, worked in 5. I always lose track. 5 or 6 school districts in the Twin Cities area. Started in Robbinsdale, then did some consulting, then worked in Elk River, Wayzata, Eden Prairie, and Spring Lake Park before coming to CESO Communications in July of 2019.
Awesome. It seems like you've been there longer than that, but it's like COVID years or whatever, where it just kind of stretches out. So I bet it feels much longer than 4 years, right?
Some days, yes.
Awesome. All right. And how about you, Nicole?
Well, I just hit my first anniversary. Been here a year, yay, at CESO Communications. And before that, I spent 23 years in the Park Hill School District, which is in the Kansas City area, which is where I still live. And I was briefly straight out of college. I got my bachelor's in journalism and mass communication, and I went into, I was a newspaper reporter for a year straight out of college. And I went, oh, this is not for me. I'm covering the schools and I'm seeing the school PR people, and I'm thinking they have a much better, they're using their skills to build people up and build support for schools. And I could really get into that. And because I felt like I was being asked to tear people down. And so I was excited to get into school PR, and I didn't realize that these jobs don't just come open every day of the week, and got lucky. And 2 weeks later, a job came open in the Park Hill School District, and I was there for more than 2 decades after that. So I really got lucky there. And then when it was time to move on, I got lucky again because I connected with Bob. So
Yeah.
of course I had known him for 20 years.
Yes. Good connections in the school PR world. And what year were you the NSPRA president again?
I was NSPRA president in, I want to say it was 2020, 2021. Does that sound right? No, or maybe was it to 2020, 21, 22, I think.
Okay.
Something like that. It was in COVID years. So
yes, it was. But if you recognize Nicole's name, that may be why. So tell me, Bob, just a little bit more about what CESO does for schools, because you came on board in 2019. CESO had been serving schools specifically before that, but now you've really opened up this opportunity to serve schools with communication support.
Yeah, CESO has 6 divisions. We're obviously a part of CESO Communications, and we support schools, school districts, and education organizations. That's all we do. Most of our team has either worked in a school district communications office, or has worked with school districts on an ongoing basis in some other form. We provide a full array of service to school districts, communications, marketing, engagement. We provide for districts that have large staffs and districts that don't have anybody. And we really run the gamut and really support districts as best we can through the communications area.
Okay. And you work with schools all over the country.
Yeah, we currently have clients in 25 states. By Friday, that could grow to 27, depending on how my next couple of days goes. And we are really, one of the things I'm most proud of is we're very much a remote company. We have 18 people on our team, and 6 of us live here in the Twin Cities, but everybody else is scattered all over the country. And it's really great because we're able to serve districts, and we can do most of the work we do from afar anyway. But we're able to go out and hire the best of the best. I mean, we can hire people like Nicole Kirby and Julie Thandem and Jim Cummings, and some of the highly experienced people who don't necessarily live here but are really, really talented. So we're really proud of that part of our company.
Yeah. Awesome. And Nicole, what are some of the projects that you specifically help with at CESO?
Oh, I've gotten to help with so many different things, which is kind of fun. It's like being back in the school PR seat where you get to a little bit of everything. You're never getting bored because you're doing a little bit of everything. Because if it's school PR related, we do it. Okay. We do so many different kinds of things for different clients. I'm a geek about communication planning, and so I really enjoy getting to really dig into a good communication plan. And I've gotten to do a few of those for districts this year, and So I'm super jazzed about that kind of work, but I've gotten to do all kinds of things. I even got to see Bob in person a few times at focus groups in places throughout the country. So.
That is fun. Remote is good, but sometimes seeing each other in person. And I know that I've heard really great things about your just your communication audit program that you guys have. Kind of a low cost option, but you're really able to identify things. And the people that listen to this podcast are people that are willing to take their communications and they want to take it to the next level. So I definitely would recommend checking out CESO for a variety of options. And both of you could talk about a lot of things, but I know that you spoke at the NSPRA seminar this summer, and I heard great things about your breakout session where you were talking all about how to communicate financials, which isn't the most fun maybe, but I just thought, gosh, if you could share your expertise with our listeners. So first off, like, I don't care who goes first, but what are some examples of communication where we must include financials in our communications?
I can jump in to begin with. I think one of the things, Andrea, that we kind of think of is not so much just uh, uh, financial communication or communication of financial issues, but it's communication of complex issues.
Okay.
Which almost always includes finance and budget, but it also can include some facility work. A lot of curriculum work can be really complex. So there's and in truth, in school districts, a lot of the things that we're trying to share with our staff and community, there's complexity to it. There's jargon. There's definitions. There's just pure complicated and complex, and issues are often woven together. And one of our jobs as communicators is to help people understand all the separate issues, but then how they marry together. So we really like to think about it from a how do we communicate? How do we better, more effectively communicate when an issue is complex?
And Nicole, I've got a question for you because you were in the same district for 23 years. Now, when I was new to school PR back in 2014, I didn't even really know that it existed. There's all these acronyms and all of this stuff that I have no idea what it means. And I'm sure
Alphabet
when
soup.
you started out from just not just, but a news reporter to the school, all of a sudden these things were new to you. But after a while, you start understanding what they are. How do you, as a communicator, make sure that you kind of realize what's complex and what's not? And how have you gone about, especially like those acronyms that I always think are confusing?
Yeah, it is really interesting. I was lucky to come from a journalism background because I had the training and expertise to make the complex simple. It is your job when you write for the public to make things clear and simple. And so if something is an acronym, it should be part of your thinking to translate it. If something is not common knowledge, if you're not a school business official, then it should be part of your thinking naturally to think about your audience, put yourself in their shoes. This is kind of a matter of empathy. You should always be putting yourself in the shoes of your audience and saying, what do they know? What do they need to know? What do they want to know? And what do they not understand about what I'm saying? And another thing that comes from kind of a writing background is kind of a harsh term. There's a phrase, kill your darlings. And it has to do with even if something feels really important to you, you've got to understand when you're simplifying something down to the essence of what people need to know, what needs to go. Even if it seems really important to you, it needs to go. so that you can distill it down to just what people, if they walk away knowing nothing else, what do they need to know? And the rest can just fall away. And so that's a matter of empathy and putting yourself in the shoes of your audience.
Yeah.
Yes. Sometimes it's nice to not overcomplicate it. I know I'm a talker, even when I write, and then it's like half the time you go back and review it and you're like, this isn't all needed. Like, just give them the information they need so it doesn't make it more confusing. Bob, do you have some more tips to share on just how we can clarify that, the complex things for schools?
Yeah, it's interesting the timing of this, Andrea. I'm actually doing a presentation on Thursday at the ASBO International Conference on communicating complex issues, hanging out with a bunch of business
business
directors
officials. Yeah.
And when we talk to them, one of the things that we taught, there's 4 things that I like to emphasize in terms of communicating complex issues. And that's time and repetition, and message layering and context. I got those in a different order. So it's really time, repetition, context, and message layering. And let me just talk quickly about that. Time quickly is you've got to spread it out. You can't do it once. You've got to do it over the course of 5 or 6 months or even longer because it's complex. And if you feed them once, it's not going to work. You have to spread out your messaging over time and in a variety of channels. You can't just do it in a newsletter or social media. You got to spread it out. And you have to do it over time. The notion of repetition, again, is repeating the same message or several messages over and over again. The notion of context is really about moving beyond the content. The content is, from a financial perspective, numbers are content. It costs $4 million. Most people, when they hear those kinds of numbers, they get freaked out because it's a big number. But if you put some context to it, now I understand that for this $4 million, we're able to serve 5,000 children, blah, 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 blah. So thinking about what is the context that fits into the content. And then finally, it's the notion of layering and these complicated and complex issues to really, over time, you layer information. So you don't expect everyone to consume the whole book all at once, but you provide it in ways, in layers that allow people to kind of build their knowledge and build their information and to think through. But the key in all of this is time. You've got to have a plan, and you've got to have a strategy built in to do it so your consumer, your reader can digest it over a course of time. We see this when we do referendum campaigns. School districts try to come out and sell it in 2 months, and it's really complicated, and the voters go, no. But then when you come back and you allow some time for them to consider and digest and understand, you often see a different result. So again, the notion of time is probably the most critical piece of this.
And I'm sure when you're working with schools, and you've probably heard this, Nicole, since you've started working, is like, we already told them, like we already did it. And so in some cases, it's like when you get sick of hearing it and you know it by heart and whatever, that's probably when you've actually done it enough. What do you have any other examples from maybe what you've worked on, Nicole, or you, Bob, on that context piece? Because Bob, you had shared, we're going to be able to serve this many kids. I've often seen, especially with referendums, like it's going to cost you this many dollars per, $100,000 of your home. What are some other context things that have been used that have been helpful? Nicole, do you have any specifically?
Yeah, we've done things like it's going to cost you as much as a pizza, or it's going to cost you as much as a latte every month, or something like that, where you put it in the context of something that feels tangible. There's also the context of what does it go for? It's not just a big pile of money. Here's what it will mean for kids. And once you contextualize it, you know, this means that these kids, I like to do kind of a what's in it for my school kind of a breakdown. We called it the what's in it for me information, and we break it down by building. So people very much want to apply things to themselves. And that's the context that they like to look at things in. So if my kid goes to XYZ Elementary, what do they get out of this? And breaking that down for them and giving them those examples. For you, we're going to change the entrance to make it a safer entryway. And we're going to have updated playground equipment, or whatever it is. And so that people can then understand in more concrete terms what this means for them.
Oh.
I think one of the examples I would give, Andrea, is when we're trying to communicate budget reductions or budget additions, oftentimes the cost is the content. So we share, well, we need to reduce the budget by $3 million. That means nothing. Cost is one dimensional. People respond to $3 million as, well, that's a big number. It's when we get into the context, we start to communicate the value and the impact. So, for example, you might say, if we reduce this amount from this program, we will save $1 million. Okay, there's a content, there's a cost, but what's the impact and the value of that $1 million? That's where we can start engaging and start telling some stories and sharing some other content. Here's the number, but here's the value. Here's the impact. Here's what that number does. And it takes that piece of content and just expands it to allow people to understand, oh, I get it now. Oh, I get it. It's not just a number anymore. It's all these little faces. It's all this. It's the impact of it. And I think if we can get our communicators, but also our business officials, our superintendents, we gotta get those folks to think like this, because throwing out budgets, those are huge numbers and they're so easily dismissed. So again, adding some context to it is really, really important.
And I'm sure, relating it back to the impact on kids. I mean,
absolutely.
If we have to reduce this budget, this means instead of 18 kids in a classroom, it's going to be 28 kids. And,
That's a great example.
Yeah. But I have a question in regard. I mean, this is especially when it comes to like a referendum or a bond, but there are often questions of, you can't really tell people to vote yes. So you have to be careful. And I love the fact of telling stories, but what's that fine line, or what kind of guidance do you give to your schools in regards to being able to share stories like that and not say, we're totally telling them they have to vote yes? Do you have any advice there?
I try to keep it not a fine line. I try to keep it a bright line.
Okay.
Because we don't want to put any of our clients in a bad position, keep them well on the right side of the law. So everything needs to be purely informational, and leave the advocacy to the citizen committees. And so when we're giving these examples, we really need to be thinking about, this is what it would look like, this is what it would mean, and not that anybody is saying you have to do this, that if this were to pass, this is what it would look like, this is what it would mean for kids. Here's concretely what that looks like for your child at XYZ Elementary.
I think too, Andrea, it's another opportunity for us to introduce the notion of time in our communications, because if you're doing really effective communication and really effective storytelling, 12, 18, 24 months before you go out and ask an election. You're gonna build that context. So when you come to say, hey, community, we need some additional space, or we need more money to fund our schools, you've already built some awareness, you've built some context around, you've built these stories around what you're doing. That, I think, is the key piece here. When we counsel districts to do, if they're doing levy or bond elections, we say 12 to 24 months. Do it 12 to 24 months. Don't do it in 4 or 5 months. You might do, some of that might be internal, but you're thinking and planning those messages, and you're getting some of that content out that's going to help you. And the notion of time and communication just can never be underestimated. It's such the longer we have to communicate, usually the better off we're going to be.
You guys mentioned that you had met up at maybe a focus group. And I think that's one spot where people are often like, I don't have time to do that. But those focus groups give you so much clarity into what people are really thinking, and maybe what the question should even be. Or even if it's not a bond or referendum, maybe they're just deciding what they're going to be doing with their budget, and they really want to understand. So I'm imagining having those listening sessions, make sure people know that you're actively seeking that, and then using that feedback can definitely help when you turn your content into context. Is that right?
Absolutely. That kind of research is so important. You can get some quantitative feedback to, if you're heading into an election, to say, what would people support? What kind of a tax tolerance do they have? And then fill in the gaps there with some qualitative feedback from some focus groups about, what does that mean? What does that look like in actuality? Why do people feel the way they do? And that really helps drive messaging. And frankly, if a district's being responsible, it helps drive what that package looks like, because they create something that their community will support.
Yeah. What about in regards to finding those stories that would matter? And how do you tell those stories? Sometimes we think about a story and we're like, oh my gosh, it has to be a video, but it doesn't have to be a video. And it obviously can be told via social media, but a lot of other channels as well. So how do we find those stories? And then how are those stories best communicated with these complex issues?
Yeah. I think one of the things that I share with my business official colleagues is to take those complex notions and fold them into a story from a classroom, or a staff perspective, or a student perspective. And for example, it might be a program. We're funding this literacy program, for example. Okay, let's go to the second grade classroom and find a teacher and find some kids and tell that story of literacy. But then there's maybe a little kernel. We take the financial piece and fold in it. It's not the whole story, but it's a tiny part of the story. But we let the staff, we let the teachers and the kids grab people's attention, because the kids are going to grab the attention, and they're going to get people leaning in, and then we can fold in some of these other messages later. But we say all the time, school communicators are so lucky because they got a billion stories. They just got to go with it and walk into school. There's thousands of stories in every school building in America. We just have to go find them and tell them, and then we can take some of these other kinds of issues and fold in those stories, or group them in a way that draws attention to a particular topic. And there's all different kinds of ways to do that.
Okay.
Every story is like a Trojan horse that comes in, and it grabs a hold. It takes root in somebody's mind because it's interesting, and our brains are biologically wired for stories. And but you just have to make sure that the story you're telling, that the nugget that's inside that Trojan horse really drives home the message that you're trying to help people understand. So in the example in the classroom with the literacy, this is an important program that we're trying to help make sure that kids have access to, and look at the kid it made a difference for, and now we can expand that because you really feel it, as a
Yeah.
result of that story.
So we talk about the layering, the message layering and the repetition and all of that. Can you list out, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 10 different ways that you're communicating these things? Because I think sometimes people are like, just think about social media, or they just think about website, or they just think about your newsletter. But I know there's other things beyond that. So what are some of the things that, CESO really focuses on and you guys would say these are really important to remember?
I think you have to think about your audience when you're
Yep.
deciding which communication channel that you want to use. So if you've determined that the key audience for, say, an election referendum is people of a certain age who don't have kids in schools, then maybe email newsletters aren't going to be the thing, or maybe social media isn't going to be the thing. If you determined, and so maybe that group you need to have direct mail, or you need to be working through the local media. Maybe you say, I really need to identify the families and staff so that they can be good ambassadors for this. What are the best way to reach them? So for them, maybe a big chunk of them are on Facebook, and a big chunk of them are responsive based on the numbers that we're seeing from our email newsletter. It really depends on the audience that we're trying to reach, and we target with them. So we've got so many tools in our communication tool belt, whether it's direct mail or video, social media, digital websites. We even, depending on what it is, have gotten into buying ads on digital ads often, because you can be so targeted with those. But again, that very much depends on who's the audience and what do we want that audience to do and know.
I think one of my favorite communication vehicles, if you're targeting parents, if you're looking to communicate parents, and I don't know that enough of us do this really well, but that's using the school newsletter to carry information that is beyond the school. I'll call it district level information, because people read those darn school newsletters, and they read them. And I'm not suggesting that the district put in 3 pages of content, but maybe we could put in 400 or 500 words every time they do the newsletter to share information about some content we want people to know. I think it's also, again, to emphasize Nicole's point, the audience drives the channel. One of the things that I would say is, depending on your audience, some of the traditional media is really effective. For example, we're finding in some smaller towns, radio is a very important channel to communicate with some members of an audience. In a larger metro area, probably not. But in some areas, radio is like, this is, especially in older population, they listen to the radio. And I know that, we lean heavily on, in school communication, we lean heavily on email newsletters and websites and social media, but don't forget print. We are seeing more and more young people, younger families that are looking at print materials. And sometimes print, doing a newsletter or a print document or something, allows you some space to delve into some of these issues in a little bit deeper way. And we're finding success. People are reading, people are engaging in those pieces. So I think the short answer, we gave you long answers, Andrea, to your question, but the short answer is all channels are important, and work depends on your audience.
Yeah. So I want to ask, I mean, this is the Mastering Social Media for Schools podcast. And
Mhm.
since 2020, but even before then, there's sometimes where, social media is meant to be social and it can raise a lot of issues with questions and comments and all of that. And so I often say, depending on the issue, you might not want to use social media for certain things because all of a sudden you can open a huge can of worms. Not that you can't use all the other communication tools, not that you're trying to hide something, but that we're just strategic that way. I'm sure
Mhm.
you've had those issues with some of the schools that you serve. What tips or tricks or any insight could you share with us in regards to that?
Over the last um, five, 6, 7 years, I've really moved on the continuum for what social is most useful for. And at the beginning, it was all about engaging, and if you had something kind of controversial on there, well, heck, you got some engagement, so it's okay. And what I really came to was that is effective at reaching the communication goals for Mark Zuckerberg, but it isn't effective at reaching the communication goals for my school district or the school district I'm serving at that time. And so I need to be thinking about what are those goals and how to best reach them, and how does this tool play into that. And what I came to is that social is really great for having conversations about the important things that are happening in our school districts, but maybe not the controversial things, because to have a productive conversation about something in which there are differing opinions, we need to have a little bit of more of a moderated conversation. And we can do that online. There are great tools to do that online, and they're somewhat social. Your thought exchanges and your bang the tables and all these other tools provide you a way to have that back and forth dialogue with an online tool. But it's not kind of this wild, wild west free for all where we're kind of inviting trolling that isn't productive and it isn't moving the conversation forward or benefiting anyone. And so it's kind of like having a town hall where we're just letting people yell at us, instead of having kind of a moderated discussion where we're making sure that everybody in the room gets their voice heard. It's the digital version of that.
Yeah.
We've had the opportunity, Andrea, to work with a handful of districts that did not have and do not have social media. And what that opportunity for us was is to approach it from a strategic perspective. How does the use of social media fit into your strategic communications plan? It probably does, but how does it? And to build that strategy, to build the channel as a part of the strategy. I'm old enough to remember when school districts first got websites. When I first started, we didn't have one. It didn't exist. But I'm old enough to remember when it did. And when that happened, everybody created one. Nobody had a strategy. They just said everybody needs a website, so everybody had a website. Well, nobody thought, and still we're finding school districts with their website. They don't really have a strategy. There's no strategy behind it. It's a glorified file drawer. And so I think the opportunity with social media is the same with every channel. What's your strategy? How are you going to use this tool? How is it going to advance the goals of your school district? And personally, I think a lot of those more complex issues or issues that might have a political edge to them, I would not engage social media with that, because I think it has the potential of just causing you more trouble, because then you get lots of voices and you're dealing with it. It's going to become, I think, more difficult. But I think thinking through it from a strategic perspective, how am I going to use this tool as a part of my overall strategy? Where does it fit? I think that's the conversation I love to have, because you get to really analyze and think about what makes the most sense given your audience and what you're trying to communicate.
Mhm.
Yeah. And often, like you said, some of that negative feedback and chatter it's from people that aren't even in your area or even in your
Yes.
state or sometimes even in your country. So we got to
Mhm.
we got to be careful on that. So that's great advice. And that leads into my last question, which I think, Bob, I already know your answer as far as the best social media tip. If we could leave them with that. I think you mentioned something about strategy and communication, but do you have additional things that you'd like to add to that as far
Uh,
as for our listeners?
I'm going to stick with that, Andrea. You repeated it, so it must be a pretty good answer.
It is.
I just think the core of everything we do needs to stem from strategy, and it's like people, well, hey, we need to be on TikTok. Why? Tell me why you need to be on TikTok. And if you can answer that in a really effective way, then you probably need to be on TikTok. But answering those questions, really thinking about how are we going to use that strategy, and even using a simple tool like a SWOT analysis. What are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for each one of these channels? And does it make sense for you to be there? And if it makes sense, then go do it. And it makes sense. But if you don't walk through that strategic piece, you're probably not going to use it as effectively as you can.
Yeah. I like that. And I just want to note we've recently been talking a lot about Twitter and should we stay on that? Then we started talking about, well, maybe we'll use LinkedIn instead. But LinkedIn doesn't give us a lot of engagement either. And so it really caused us to pause because as much as CESO would like to say when you work with them, they automatically give you 25 hours in your day. They cannot do that. You only have limited time. So we've got to really focus on what matters. When it comes to social media of all the schools I work with, I mean, Facebook and Instagram are our best channels, but
Yeah.
certainly look at it. Those are
Mhm.
good points, Bob. How about you, Nicole? Do you have a best social media tip that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I would guess I would just not to be boring and say ditto. I'm gonna add on to what Bob said, and that is I think to really be strategic with your social media, you have to start not with the tool, but with the goal. What are you trying to accomplish? So before I say, like in your example, Bob, should we be on TikTok? I'm not going to start with the tactic of should we be on TikTok. I'm going to say, what are we trying to accomplish right now? Are we trying to get an election passed? Are we trying to make sure that we're engaging an audience that is feeling disengaged? Are we, whatever is our goal right now? What is the best way to go about doing that? We're going to do the research about who these people are and what they're thinking right now, and then we're going to build our strategies and our tactics around that. And so maybe we decided that it's kids at the high school level, and the best way to grab them is TikTok. Okay, now let's start there. But I'm not going to start with the cool, shiny, new social media thing. I'm going to start with what I'm trying to accomplish and find tools that help me meet that.
I love it. This was like a little master class. And also a plug for APR because these two are both richly rooted in all of that, RPI and the research. And it just helps make things make sense, especially when you have a bunch of people in your school district that want to tell you what you should be doing. And when you can turn it around and base it on some of those research and what are our goals, that really helps. Thank you guys both for hanging out with us so long today. What's
Thank
the
you.
best way to stay connected to you? So Nicole, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
I hope that I will try all of it. My email, nicole.kirby at the CESO, THECESO.com. Call me, 816-289-5633. I don't mind giving that out.
Okay.
Call me, write me.
Got it. I'll
Text
make
me.
sure to include that in the show notes. And how about you, Bob?
Yeah, same way. I have a different phone number, but 612-325-2127. You can always call me. Email is bob.noyed, Noyed at theceso.com. We're also, as an organization, on LinkedIn. If that is a channel of your preference, you can also go to our website, theceso.com/communications, and we have a form you can fill out that comes directly to us if you want to communicate. But just grab any of us, either through email or phone. We're happy to have a conversation with people.
Okay. So I'm going to put that all in the show notes. And then I've just got a question for both of you. Do you have a couple examples of communicating complex issues for a school that I could just include with my show notes? I don't know if you have like a case study or just something from one of your schools that you wouldn't mind sharing. I just know my listeners are really big hands-on people. And I think you did a good example of, giving several examples. Good job giving those examples. But do you have anything that I could link in the show notes, do you think?
I bet we can find something for you.
Okay.
Yeah, we've probably got a handful of things. The challenge, well, it's not going to be a challenge for Nicole, but the challenge for me is to thinking through those examples and to finding a couple. We've got a bunch.
Okay.
We just have to take some time to think through it. But
Okay. And I
a
know
lot of them around referenda.
Yeah, and
those are simple things. But
I think those are good examples to give. And certainly, I mean, sometimes it's it's specific for a school and maybe they don't want it out for everybody. So I understand.
That's what we got to think through.
Yeah, so we'll do our best. I'm putting you on the spot. So we'll do our best to put those in the show notes. But if you've got more questions with your specific issue, I know Nicole and Bob would both get on a phone call with you to talk about some options that you could use, and whether or not you hire them or you just get some advice. Like, we're all in this together, and they have been very helpful for me. So thank you guys so much for hanging out, and thanks everyone for listening today. We'll see you back here next week. Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.